Good afternoon, Jan. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you, Daphne.
Yes. So we discussed that we are having a lot of interesting conversations, and it would be a nice idea to start recording and sharing and see what other people can get from our conversation. So I just pushed the record button, and I thought let's have an informal conversation, maybe on International Women's Day.
Mm-hmm.
That was last week, and to be honest, I'm not really all about the globalist holidays, but to be honest, I have really enjoyed International Women's Day. And not only because of celebrating women, but also because of discussing a lot of issues women are still struggling with. And well, actually also because I really enjoy celebrating the men we have around us that support us and are encouraging us. And you're one of them. So I thought maybe we can have a conversation about women empowerment and the issues women are still facing today in corporate life, but also in day-to-day life. And I was also very curious about your thoughts, because I assume that you are seeing patterns with the women that you are talking regularly with. That's an assumption. But yeah, I see it around me that the challenges I see and face are, I'm not unique with that. So curious what your thoughts are.
Huh. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yes.
And glad for me. I mean, I took some notes to see, hey, what's going on. Let's start with the idea of International Women's Day, what you just said. When you were talking about the global holidays or the global days, the global moments where certain topics are, let's say, on the agenda of everybody, right? Tomorrow is another one of those days on March 13th, Freedom Day, which is a thing. I think it's driven mostly by CNN, but it's something I find very interesting. Last year, I think I wrote something about it as well. And I think it has a lot of relationship to the whole idea of International Women's Day. Right? At the end of the day, apparently, and I think this is the big shocker, and maybe that it sounds strange when I say that, but apparently it's necessary to have something called International Women's Day. Apparently, it's necessary to have something called a Freedom Day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reason for that is obvious. Not everybody is free. And there are differences in how women are treated or the things that women face on a day-to-day basis or in corporate life or in working life to start with. So I think from that perspective, it's logical and necessary that certain days get extra attention or certain topics get extra attention on certain days. Let me put it like that. And then it's interesting that women need to be one of those topics.
Yes.
And I think especially when we look at the status of the world right now, and I'm not going to name names because I don't want to turn this into political conversation, but I think where I'm going, you're clear that this is what you're talking about here. When I see how certain men in particular are behaving towards women, I'm like, what is this all about? And that's not how I see the world or how I see the relationship between men and women. The interesting thing is it's on my tongue to say we're equal. And then again, I realize we're not, right? Because there are clearly differences between men and women. And I just realized how even when you said it, International Women's Day, like, well, hang on, there's a whole big discussion around that at the moment. Like, so men, women, X, I mean, what are we? What do we call ourselves, right? And I think that's another topic which is sort of interwoven here, which also has a lot to do with freedom. At the end of the day, you are who you are, right? You are Daphne, I'm Jan, we do our things. Is it important for our conversation that you're a woman and I'm a man, right? And that's not what I see. So we're two human beings, as we said, having casual conversations on a regular basis, but casual and going deep. And when I look at you do I see you as a woman right now, or do I see you as Daphne, with whom I'm having a great conversation? Right? And you could be one of your colleagues with whom I have great conversations as well. And I'm not going to name names in this case either, because I don't want to point people out. But you could be one of your colleagues, and you know him very well, and I know him very well. And I wouldn't be having a conversation with him and looking at him first like a man, and then as the human being he is.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of people who do.
Yeah.
Let's park it here for a second.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would even go further, like, yes, we are humans, of course, but I see us even as souls with a body.
Mm-hmm.
So with that regards, yes, we have a gender, but that doesn't define us from my perspective.
Yeah, agree. And I think as much as it doesn't define us, it does sort of, at least for a lot of people, imply our role in the world. Because there are differences between men and women from a natural perspective, right? In the case of what we are capable of doing, or the role that we play in the whole idea of reproduction, and making sure there are, or making sure, seeing that there are other human beings still coming into the world. Let me put it like that. Making sure is also a big thing. Like, why making sure? But so there are differences. So it was interesting when a while ago I had on the tip of my tongue, like, we're equal, and then of course we're not.
No.
But we should have equal rights.
Yes.
We should have equal rights in the sense of how we treat ourselves, what we want to do in the world, how we want to express our potential. Going back to what you said, being souls, right? Being souls, we've got talents. We want to express those talents. And in that case, it shouldn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. If you want to be a leader in the corporate world, right, you should be able to do that. If you want to be a stay-home mom, you should be able to do that. If you want to be a stay-home dad, you should be able to do that. And interestingly enough, of course, the world, our society, has opinions about that.
Yeah.
And most of us sort of like, yeah, because if people say this, we need to listen, and we start to obey. We start to get into this place of conformity, right? Because everybody else thinks this is the way it should be done. This is how I was brought up. So this is how I behave.
Yeah. 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 And with the regards to the human journey, and also your background, for me, growing up, of course I knew I was a girl, and now I'm a woman, but I'm also developing and figuring out that everything is much more fluid than I assumed earlier on. So also the definition of what is a woman also changed for me during the years. And for me, the most interesting in my personal development is that how others define me. I start caring less and less. And that's actually, then we get back to your Freedom Day. That is for me freedom, that I can choose my own identity, and I have the freedom to choose. And of course, others do define my identity. And for me particularly, it's very difficult to put me in a box. Well, they can put me in the female box, but even on that side. So you are aware I had operation, I had cancer, and they took my womb out.
Yeah.
So yeah, I am a daughter, but I will never be a biological mother in that sense. I will not be able to carry children. So even in that sense, people, have a lot of ideas, but I don't care too much. And that is the freedom and privilege that I have, because I have a good job. I'm financially independent. So the more empowered I am, the less I care, and the less I can care, because if you're dependent on other people and on how they define you or me, you get stuck in this projected identity.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious that the two things that came to mind immediately. One is when you say your definition of what it means to be a woman changed. So I'm curious what that definition was and what it is right now. That's one thing. That's one part of my thinking right now. And the other part is, do we actually need definitions? But that's maybe that's a way bigger conversation. But I'm just curious about what your idea is about that definition and how it changed.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think it also has to do with insecurity, and when you're in puberty, then your body starts changing and you become more aware. Because I think when I was a very young girl, of course, I like the color pink a lot, and I love My Little Pony and all this girl stuff. And I think that's how I saw myself as a girl. So I really loved pink. I had my whole bedroom pink. Now I still like pink, but I don't. I can let it go, and I can still feel feminine. And like I said before, the more independent I became, the more also my definition of a woman changed. And I have actually given a keynote last week at a big Microsoft partner. They invited me to come speak at International Women's Day.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a keynote. I can read it out. It's quite intense, but it was called "What is a Woman?"
Mm-hmm.
Shall I go for it?
Yeah, go. I mean, I think this is an interesting part of the definition, right? It's what you said. Your definition has changed. You are talking about preference of colors, right? Which is interesting. Pink and My Little Pony. I mean, why would that define you as being a woman? Why wouldn't a young boy like the color pink or like to play with My Little Pony? I mean,
Yeah.
so is that really about the definition between what is a man, what is a woman? You are talking about femininity, and that's something completely different than being a woman. Because when you start, I think even when you start looking up definitions of that, is femininity is then more about caring or openness or tenderness, right? I mean, those are words that come to mind. I'm not saying that's the definition, by the way, but those are words that come to mind immediately. Interesting. Those are more qualities of being a human being, which I think would be good if certain men would have them as well. Of course, there are men who would define those qualities as, then you're not manly, right? You need to be the and the do I know what, but definitely not the kind type, because then you're not a man. Well, not by your definition.
Yeah.
Are we allowed to have different definitions? As I said, do we need to have a definition? But let's hear what you had to say on that keynote in particular.
Okay. So I will start, and it's really about the conversation we're having now. So I will read it out because it's not I can do something by head, but so what is a woman? In the corporate world, a woman in tech is often reduced to a headline, breaking barriers, unusual, or even a diversity hire. But I've never fit comfortably into any of those labels. I stand here today not just as a woman in tech, but as a daughter, a granddaughter, a Muslima, a cancer survivor, and a soul carrying a body through this life. And if we want to talk about visibility, we need to start with the simple truth. I'm not just a successful career. I'm not just a woman. I'm a soul with a story. What is a woman? A story with many names. What is a woman? That's a question with many answers depending on who you'd ask. A woman is a mother, except I have no womb. Cancer took that from me 5 years ago. A woman is a daughter. Yes, I'm the oldest daughter of 5, and my mother, she spent 8 years in prison. They called her a witch, whispered lies into the ears of Dutch media. But my mother taught me healing, not with pills or permission, but with what nature gave us. She taught me to stand in truth, no matter how uncomfortable it made others. A woman is a granddaughter. My Jewish grandmother fled to Israel, shaping her identity through fear. Fear of Muslims, fear of losing her roots. My grandfather, a Holocaust survivor, taught me what humans are capable of when fear becomes policy. A woman is a Muslimah. I became Muslim when I was 20, drawn to the beauty of surrender and the power of Ramadan. This is my 18th Ramadan. A Moroccan man once showed me how the sacred month softened his heart, and I needed to understand that transformation for myself. I became Muslim alone, with no one to hold my hand, and Islam became the key that unlocked my worth after years of trauma and abuse. It taught me my soul is sacred, my body is a trust, and my voice is meant to be heard. Then I stepped into the tech world, the so-called matrix. This world didn't ask about my soul, my faith, or my story. It wanted output, results, deliverables. But you cannot cut the soul from work. I tried it first. I played the game, smiling without challenging, softening my edges, leaving my prayer mat at home so I wouldn't have to explain myself. That's called covering. It's when you shrink parts of yourself to fit into a space not built for you. Covering is hiding your illness, your faith, your grief, your full humanity, or even your femininity, because you fear it will make others uncomfortable. Then cancer came, and I had no choice to become visible. Fragile and able to hide behind the strong woman mask, I showed up on LinkedIn, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to survive. And something incredible happened. The more I showed up as myself, not as the polished corporate version, but the whole truth, the more people leaned in. They didn't need another expert, they needed a human. That's when I understood. Visibility isn't just about being seen, it's also about being known, not for what you produce, but for who you are. Of course, visibility doesn't erase bias. Let me give you a definition, not from a textbook, but from my life. Microaggressions are those tiny offhand remarks. Where are you really from? You're so articulate. You're not like the others. Each one lands like a paper cut. You can ignore it. Together, they bleed you dry. And allyship. That word is so overused, it's almost lost its meaning. Let me show you what it looks like. It's the colleague who notices when you've been interrupted for the third time and says, I want to hear her finish. It's the manager who doesn't just ask how you are after cancer treatment, but make sure the project deadlines flex to your body's reality. Allyship is not a campaign, it's not a hashtag, it's a daily practice of making space when you could have taken it. When I joined Microsoft, I learned to think global and act local, to change the world around me by starting with myself. I was trained to lead, not by imitating the loudest voices in the room, but by standing firmly in my own truth. Even now, after all these years, I'm still often the only woman in the room. But now I refuse to disappear into silence. I've learned that the vibration of being fully yourself while doing work you love is magnetic. You attract what is aligned with your truth, and that truth has power. This Ramadan, as I fast while leading partner meetings and mentoring others, I reflect on how productivity has been defined for us. Productivity in tech is speed, scale, output, but Ramadan reminds me, real productivity is becoming more honest, more aware, more aligned with our values. What if corporate culture borrowed from Ramadan? If we measured success not by busyness and exhaustion, but by impact, not by hours logged, but by how much we elevate each other. So today, I'm not asking you to celebrate me. I'm inviting you to rewrite the script with me. What if the most successful women in tech were not the ones who climbed the highest in the matrix, but the ones who dared to bring their whole souls in the room? What if visibility wasn't about standing out, but about standing firmly in truth? What if allyship wasn't a corporate initiative, but a quiet daily practice of choosing courage over comfort? This International Women's Month, I ask you, what part of yourself have you been leaving outside of the room? And what might happen? What kind of world might we build if you brought all of yourself inside? Because I promise you this, the future of tech is not found into our algorithms, it is found in us, in the untamed, unapologetic beauty of human souls daring to be seen. Yes, was quite intense to do it in front of a crowd. Yeah.
I can imagine. How did the crowd respond? What happened?
I think they felt a little bit overwhelmed, but I did get a applause. So, and I did make people think, because I got a lot of messages after from people who were thinking on how to redefine themselves. So some of them told me that they had this work mask, like this work persona they are when they're at work, and they're a different person when they're at home. And they told me that multiple people told me that they were reconsidering how to bring their true selves to work instead of having this alternate persona. So for me, that was my goal. And like we started the conversation, what a woman is, it can be so many things, but for me, we're a soul with a body, and daughter, mother, yeah, granddaughter. And my wish is that more people will bring their womanhood, and also for men to bring their more vulnerable sides to work and show up as their true selves.
Yeah. Yep. I love it. I mean, as I just said, there's so much to unpack in what you said. The key thing that shows up for me are two words, and those two words are inner authority. And what that means for me is that listening to your story, the background of your mother, your grandmother, your grandfather, I mean, that whole narrative, what happened there, right? Listening to the microaggressions, which are awful, which are probably careful. I mean, big assumption here. I mean, we were talking about assumptions before. Big assumption here based on ignorance. And ignorance is a strange word. I always saw ignorance as in the sense of almost apathy, a sense of not caring. But then I started to redefine ignorance in the sense of it's just about not being in the know, right? I am ignorant about a lot of things because I just don't know. But we gave it a completely different meaning. And I think a lot of that microaggression is about ignorance. I mean, it's funny when somebody comes to you and says, "So where are you originally from?" And I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" I mean, we're living in the Netherlands, right? I mean, we've got this melting pot of cultures here. I mean, is that a question we still ask? Wow. I mean, right? I mean, and now call me ignorant for not knowing that or seeing that. But I think that it's one of the craziest questions people never ask me, unless, of course, you're abroad or when we're doing things like what we're doing right now virtually, and people hear my accent, especially when I start talking German, they're like, "But you're not from Germany." Nope. Then they hear the Dutch thing in there, and then it's a normal conversation, right? But depending on the context, I think it's an odd question to ask. But it's about inner authority. I love what you said that, and that's why I asked you how the crowd responded, basically, how the audience responded, that they felt overwhelmed. And I think it is overwhelming because what you did is utterly personal, very personal, right? I've been doing my work as a sales trainer with Microsoft now for, I think, around and about 25 years this year. And one of the first sessions I did in the Netherlands, the office was still closer to the airport. And we did a session in the hotel just opposite of the airport. I just remembered this right now. And during that session, I introduced myself. And in the first 2 minutes, I showed a slide with pictures of my family to basically say, "Hey, we're going to be working here together for the next 2 or 3 days. I want you to know who the guy is in front of the room who you will be working with." So I showed them a bit about my family and other things. And I was really vulnerable in that sense. I mean, for me, that was the first time to introduce myself like that, like, and this is who I am. Now let's get to work. And one of the guys couldn't handle that. And he was like, this is not what we do. This is not what we're here for. And we got into a sort of an argument, and we were called into the office of the then general manager, or the EPG lead, I think back then, for Microsoft. And we had a conversation about that openness. Right. And at the end, he realized he overreacted to the way I presented myself. But I can imagine if what you just said, right, takes time to digest. What you said, if you hear another human being that vulnerable, what you told about your mother and what happened to her, what you said about yourself, the remark about your cancer, your womb being removed. So being a daughter, but never being a natural mother.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That hits home for some people. There may have been people in the room, which you are not aware of, by the way, who actually have gone through a similar thing. And you don't know what they experienced having that experience, going through all of that. You don't know what they experienced as you said that.
Yeah.
Right? I did a program a couple of years ago somewhere abroad and shared some ideas about coaching with the audience. And I shared a particular coaching instrument by Tony Robbins, who has this thing he calls the Dickens approach, and which is really about the story of Scrooge and the three ghosts of past, present, and future visiting somebody. And I use a lot of that in my coaching to make people understand that if there's a change you want to make, we were talking about some of those changes in the beginning for you as an example, but if there's a change you want to make in your life, think about these people who want to bring their full self into work as an example. And if you don't make that change, what is the impact of that change on you, on the way you do your work, potentially on your family, a month, a year, 3 years, 5 years from now?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's a very interesting technique, because at a certain point, at a certain moment in time, it's called future pacing, you start to literally feel something in your body. If I don't make this change happen, then something is, and it doesn't feel nice. So I've had that experience, and I shared that experience. And my experience had been to be in that room with Tony Robbins and 5,000 other people. And my wife, then my girlfriend, was there as well. And one of the big things I had actually, and this is interesting, and I hope I can share this with you, because this is the personal part of that story, right? Talking about being vulnerable. One of the things, and I just started my business back then, I had on my list was children. Nah, children are going to be in the way of my career. And that's, just a statement I had back then, a belief I had back then. So I wrote that down somewhere, and I knew, of course, that my girlfriend, at one day being my wife, probably would be wanting children, right? If that would be the case. And then, of course, the big question is, can you have them? Blah, blah, the whole thing around it, right? It's not a given. So I start with that as a premise. And Tony Robbins starts to do his thing. And he says, look at the belief you just wrote down, because that's what it is, a rule, right? A belief, a little sentence that sort of drives our behavior. Look at that belief and what would happen to you in your life if you still have that belief a year from now. And I was like, a year from now, what are we talking about? Nothing. I just started my business, man. Hey, I'm building my career here. I'm doing the thing I love. I love being in here. That belief, nothing will change a year from now. Nothing will be changed a year from now. And then he got to 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. And at a certain point, I'm not sure where it was, at 2 or 3, but I was like, something clicked, something started clicking. And what started clicking was, well, hang on. I can have that belief, but what does Yonette actually think? Because if she really feels like this is what she wants, and I'm saying no, what might be the impact of that on our relationship? Will there still be a relationship? Will we ever get married? Will we ever live together? So that whole thing starts to happen. And interestingly enough, he didn't say anything. All he said was, look at your belief, and that's the one that I wrote down. And if you still have that 2, 3, 5 years from now, what will be the impact on your life, basically? So that started happening. Then he went to 10 years, 15, 20, 25. And what I'm sharing with you right now may hit you actually. So I'm conscious about what I'm sharing with you, based on what you just shared with me. And if you feel like, hey, enough is enough, stop, then please let me know. But at that moment, I was like, well, the relationship is one thing. right? That's the key thing for me at that point in time. Having the children all of a sudden was like, well, hang on, that means I'm never going to be having the experience of being a dad.
Yeah.
He went to 20 years, 25 and 30, because I think that's actually how far we went in that whole conversation. And I realized if there will never be children, then Jonette's parents and my parents, as you were just talking about your grandparents before,
Yeah.
may not have the pleasure of being grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, something snapped. And what snapped was I started crying and I was looking at that thing like, really? I mean, is this a belief? Is this true? This is crazy. So that's a story. And this is, I think, one of the first times I'm actually sharing it again in public, right? Sharing it with you right now. Because when I shared that story as an example back then with that audience in that workshop, at the end, the general manager of that subsidiary came to me and said, Jan, we have a problem. You've hurt 3 people in the room. And I was like, I did what? And her statement, or that statement, really hit me, right? And this is where what we were talking about the words just before and how that actually does something in your body. So I heard it and something happened in here.
Mm-hmm.
And hearing it is one thing. And then I realized I'm not on this earth. My soul is not here to hurt other human beings. I'm here to help people. I'm here to, as you were just talking about, this whole thing about freedom, liberating humanity's potential, like you are inspiring or sharing your story as a source of inspiration to show people, hey, you decide what your definition is, right? You choose your identity. Look at me. Stuff happened, right? In the past with my family members, with myself. I'm on a journey. I made choices and here I am.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's your call about how you live your life. And there may be hurt, there may be moments like, wow, but that's how you live your life. But when that person, when the GM said that to me, you've hurt 3 people in the room, I was like, that sort of crashed for me. Like, all right, I need to stop sharing these stories. Because if I tell those stories and I'm hurting people, that's not what I'm here for. So fast forward, I hadn't shared that story or short stories for a while, right? I have been really slow on LinkedIn back then for a long time. Because I was like, why share? I mean, if stuff like this hurts people, right? I don't know. There were 3 people in the room trying to get pregnant, and for them, it was really difficult to make that happen. So, of course, that story hits them.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about their baggage. So, and I didn't realize that. And I realized that last part when I had a conversation with one of my coaches who said, Jan, you're trying to win the unwinnable game.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to him, I said, Dave, what do you mean when you say the unwinnable game? Please elaborate on that. And he said, well, you want to inspire people. You want to liberate humanity's potential. You want to help people to see what else is possible for them. Like you were saying just before, you want people to show up as who they are.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful when you get messages from people that they basically say, hey, you made us think. And I'm checking my notes here for a second. You made people think on how to redefine themselves and reconsidering how to bring their true self to work.
Yeah.
Beautiful, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it may have hurt for some of them.
Definitely.
And that's definitely, and
Yeah.
that's not easy. So when he said the unwinnable game, I was like, Dave, you're right. And the fact that this happened in that conversation, that people were hurt because of a remark, that was not the intention. My heart's intention was to inspire. That's what the story is all about. And that's why it's a personal story. It's my experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Somebody once told me then and said, well, you could have been more considerate about who was in the audience. I said, how do I do that? Do I need to ask them and say, so what can I talk about? What can I not talk about? Show of hands. Who is trying to this? Who just lost a dog? Who has that experience? Who had this experience? Who just lost a family member? Because all of these are life experiences. And if we can't talk about those, then how can we be human?
Yeah.
So going back to what you said before, when I asked you, how did the audience feel? And you said, well, some of them were clearly overwhelmed. Totally understandable. And they were probably inspired, right? It probably, for some of them at least, contributes to this whole idea of awakening right? Contributes to the whole idea of liberating potential, contributes to the whole idea of let me take another close look in the mirror and see if the definition of how I show up today, if that is the definition, if that is how I want to show up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let me pause it here.
Well, I really enjoyed what you just said, and yeah, being hurt is also, we're humans, is part of the human experience, and that's also where growth happens. Growth
Yeah.
doesn't happen when you're comfortable. So yeah, and for me, I know I can hurt people, and even I hurt myself when I talk about some of these things. But yeah, I have to do it. I cannot deny my hurt, and it's good for me also to go through it because I learn from it, and
Yeah.
I get out stronger. So
But I think if I can interrupt you there, because I think that's what got me when that GM told me you've hurt people. Instead of saying 3 people were hurt,
mm-hmm,
and there's a big difference. And when I hear you, and I mean, my purpose is precision. I just found out. So being clear about the words is one of the key things that I'm like, we need to be aware of that. So when you say I can hurt people, that's true, but it's not your intention.
yeah,
So when you flip that coin, what you're
mm-hmm,
actually saying is people may get hurt when I share my experience.
yeah,
But that's not about you hurting people. That's
no,
about people may get hurt when you share your experience. And that's not to say that you can say anything. That's not to say that we shouldn't be mindful. That's not to
mm-hmm,
say that we shouldn't be considerate.
yeah,
And my story is my story. Your story is your story. So if you're in an environment where you feel this is a story that for me is going to make the difference to do whatever I think needs to be done right now, you should be able to, in freedom, right, share that story. Being considerate about your words. And when I listened to what you said, you didn't say anything about what they experienced. This was your experience,
yeah,
right? So when somebody hears the words microaggression, right, somebody may be like, that's not what we do. Well, hang on, this wasn't addressed to you. And by the way, if you feel that unease coming up right now or that agitation, maybe you do need to take a look in the mirror,
mm-hmm,
right? What you shared about being at work where it's sometimes hard to, or it used to be hard to express what you wanted to say and people wouldn't listen. And a colleague then had to say, well, hang on. And it's interesting how we phrase it, by the way, when I recall it properly. I want to hear what she has to say, right? Which is really about, hey, you're talking, I want to hear what you're saying. The other way of phrasing that could have been, I need you to shut up right now because you're not allowing her to speak. Right. And I'm not
yeah,
saying that would be an appropriate approach, by the way, but it's interesting how people then are not listening.
yeah, yeah. It's very interesting. Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is where we ended up because we had no clue where we were starting. I didn't know that you were going to share that keynote. And I didn't know that I was going to share the story I just shared. But that's the funny thing about how these conversations go when we really, as you said at the beginning, I mean, we start talking and we'll see where we end up.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for this first session, we have already both shared a lot for many people to think about. So yeah, I think we can close it here. It's already 45 minutes, and time goes so fast. So yeah, thank you for listening to me and also sharing your story. It's yeah, I always enjoy having conversations with you because I learn a lot. I learn about you, but I also learn a lot about myself.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think this will also give many people a lot to think about. And I'm also very happy that you shared your story about so many years ago, and I think now it's getting pretty normal to share some family pictures and share also show a little bit more the insights on personal life. So I'm
Yeah.
very happy that we've at least evolved on that sense a lot.
Yeah, well, that's one thing I still do in my workshops as well, which I enjoy doing when we do things in person. But even when we do it virtually and you start to introduce yourself, I always show that a couple of images of what I enjoy doing in life, what I'm passionate about, and my family is a part of that. Like when we're visiting a city like Amsterdam, as an example, walking there, I've got an image of this, or go to a concert, whatever we do with the four of us, because that's what life is all about, right? I mean,
Yeah.
what you bring into the corporate world and the whole discussion about outcomes and results, it's all necessary. Don't get me wrong. I mean, that's why you're hired to do a job. That's part of the job, right? That's what we do.
Yes.
And there's the personal side.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's keep sharing that.